Duty towards our neighbour. Additional Sermon 1 by Isaac Barrow. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. Quote, "Therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets." End quote. The grand intendment of the Holy Jesus, his coming into the world, the design of his laws, the reason of those many stupendous miracles which he wrought, together with the whole tendency of his life, was to display the blessed majesty of his Father, to implant in men's minds due conceptions of the being of God, whom before they falsely worshipped under the several shapes of the sun and moon, of beasts and birds, of stocks and stones, or of the trifling and less considerable parts of the universe, and to raise human nature out of those unhappy and miserable circumstances in which sin had placed it, by propagating religion and piety, virtue and goodness, justice and charity over the face of the earth. To this purpose he as well illustrated the laws engrafted on our minds by nature as enforced our obedience thereunto, in having both offered distinct and clearer accounts of the dictates thereof, and laid down more cogent motives that might persuade us to observe them. Thus, whatever was scattered up and down in the law, or declared by the prophets at several times in divers places, concerning justice and beneficence, he has compendiously but fully delivered in the text, quote, "Therefore all things," end quote, etc., which words are a general rule for all and every action that may happen between man and man, and are so to be understood that we own their obligation not only in an affirmative but in a negative proposition. For instance, if it be our duty to do unto others what we would have them do unto us, then is this negative so too: whatever ye would not have others do to you, do not unto them. Which being the exact rule by Christ given of behaviour, all the difficulty will lie in this, that there be no mistake in applying single actions to the rule. For although the rule be straight which we are to measure by, yet if our application be disorderly, it will make the whole process false and erroneous. To avoid all which inconveniences, we shall entertain the following considerations for the subject of our meditation and discourse. We will in general inquire, 1. What we would have others do unto us, that is, what measure one reasonable creature would expect at the hand of another. 2. What we would not have done unto ourselves. 3. Give the precise limitations of that rule. And after these general inquiries, that we may come nearer to practice, we shall run it down into particulars, and resolve some of the more material cases that may usually occur to most men. And since from what is spoken it may appear that the doing as we would be done by is to be understood of those actions whereby we may do good or injury to other men, it shall be our business to reduce them to their several heads, which I conceive may be these. 1. Their persons, under which hand we are to take notice of both their bodies and souls, as far as we are able to contribute to the well-being of either. 2. Their reputation or good name, which ought to be as tender to us as the apple of our eye. 3. Their estates, in relation to which our dealing with other men ought to be just and merciful, and this justice we shall take notice of in its double signification. 1. Distributive. 2. Commutative. Distributive justice will guide us in giving rewards or punishments, in discouraging or favouring and giving countenance to men, according to their merit. Justice commutative will direct us in matters of trade, buying and selling, and all manner of exchange between one and another. Then, 2, our actions must be merciful, which mercy must bear a proportion to our abilities and particular condition, namely, the poverty and distress, adversity or imprisonment of those we extend it to. And the last part of my discourse shall be persuasive, to induce you all, from the reasonableness of the thing, to observe and practice what I shall have said, and that by the following considerations. 1. From viewing the end for which we were made, which was not barely to gratify our selfish humours, but to serve our Maker in doing the greatest good we can to our fellow creatures. 2. From the intrinsic beauty and loveliness of the rule itself. 3. Because we all bear the same stamp and impress of heaven. 4. Because if we be just and generous in our prosperity, it will cause like affections in others towards us in the time of our affliction and the day of distress. 5. Did we but all do as we would be done by, it would be the best and greatest security of our lives, honours, reputations, power, and riches. 6. From consideration of the reward we may expect of God hereafter for the doing of our duty. I begin with the first, namely, what we would all have others do unto us. It must be confessed by every wary inquirer that happiness is the ultimate and farthest end which a rational creature can propose of all his actions, which happiness doth consist in the preservation of his being in the best, that is, the most comfortable condition and state it is capable of, whence it follows that we naturally desire such usage of all men as conduceth to our good, that is, our preservation, which is the main and general design of us all, for existence is so far valuable above the not being, as it is the foundation of perception, and perceptive faculties are so long desirable, as the pleasure they receive from objects exceeds the pain. For if once the torments put into the balance prove too heavy for the delights, I can see no reason but it will be better not to be, than to be miserable, since no man can reasonably think there is any good in existence when he is only preserved in being for torment, that is, to have every faculty of his mind vexed and disquieted, and every member of his body racked and tortured. Wherefore, whatsoever may administer joy or comfort, whatsoever may remove jealousies and disquietude of soul, all that is productive of tranquillity and contentment, all that is the cause of cheerfulness and real mirth, or brings forth satisfaction and peace, whatever carrieth along with it solid pleasure or profit, as being advantageous to us in the several circumstances of life, all this we would that other men should do unto us, and so are obliged to do it unto them. Thus also as our wants vary, so do our desires of others help. For being in misery, we implore comfort. If ignorant, we desire information. If in doubt, counsel. If wandering, to be guided to the right way. If in weakness, friendly to be supported. If fallen, timely to be helped up. In our dealing, we would have just and kind usage. In poverty, relief. When hungry and naked, food and raiment. Now, from hence it would be easy to collect what we would not have others do unto us, that is, whatever may be contrary to these desires, as having a certain tendency to our destruction and misery. Thus we all desire to avoid the accession of new grievances to old calamities, and think it hard measure that for our ignorance we be scoffed at or derided. Being dubious or full of scruples, we would not be more perplexed. If down, we judge it severe to be trampled on, and very unfriendly to be reproached for our poverty, or upbraided with our miscarriages. And indeed to triumph over another man's misfortune is confessedly so barbarous and inhuman, that those who are most guilty of the practice are ashamed and blush to own it. This being the general view of what we would, and what we would not have done, before I descend into a more large and particular account, I think it expedient, according to my promise, first to settle the rule on its true bottom, and within its just limitations. If therefore we look again into the words, quote, whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, even so do unto them, end quote, you may perceive that the subject and matter of this rule are actions that proceed from the will. Now, your will being often not only erroneous itself, but also the cause of all your errors, in giving her assent to propositions either not clearly or not distinctly understood, it will be but reasonable that we show and point out the rule wherefrom the will is to take her guidance and directions, which rule is right reason. The meaning then of this precept, quote, what ye would have done unto you, end quote, is whatever is reasonable, whatever measure, as consonant to the laws of equity and justice, you desire should be given to you, return the same. Since, if the will were left to itself without a guide, Then because we sometimes, labouring with an indisposed mind, desire things destructive and pernicious to ourselves, we might do what is so unto others. And the malcontent, that being weary of his life desires any would dispatch him, might become the murderer of his neighbour, and justify the action too in having done only to another what he desired to be done unto himself. Thus the prince should be obliged always to forgive the foulest crimes of rebellion, because if it were possible for him to be in the condition of a rebel, he would desire to be pardoned himself, insomuch that hereby the current of justice would be stopped up, and all processes against malefactors receive their period. For though we were offenders in the highest manner, yet we should always ourselves desire forgiveness, and thereby we should be bound always to pardon, which is destructive of the essence of a commonwealth, and for that reason not to be allowed. So that from hence we gather that our will is to be regulated by a farther rule than itself, that it is not whatever we would by the motions of our rude passions, but that which, proceeding from the calm and rectified dictates of our own conscience, we would have done unto us, we do the same unto our neighbour. Wherefore, although, if we consulted self-love and passion, we should for the worst misdemeanours beg pardon, we must not suffer the murderer to go unpunished, but deal with him according to his action, forasmuch as it is enjoined by the positive laws of God, and enforced by natural light, that he who spills man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Hitherto have you had discoursed unto you, in the gross, what usage we would have of one another, and also the rule of willing and nilling to others and ourselves, circumscribed within the due bounds thereof. Proceed we now particularly to consider man in his several capacities, wherein we either can help him or do him an injury, which be 1. His person, under which are to be considered his soul and body, as far as we are capable of contributing to their well-being, for since we all hope for the greatest good to ourselves in respect of both, we should use our best endeavours in preserving the soul and body of our neighbour. 1. As to his soul. Now, as the soul is a more noble principle and of a longer duration than the body, man's everlasting happiness or eternal misery depending chiefly on its well or ill management, so also should we love it more affectionately, and be ready to contribute, as far as lies in our power, to its happy being, an employment so generous that he who advanceth the present good or future felicity of another man's soul re-impresseth the defaced image of God on his own, and in some sense may be said to be a sharer with the blessed Jesus in the saving of the world. Now this must be done, first, by interceding with God to bestow on him all those heavenly graces that are necessary to the constituting of a true Christian, more particularly by soliciting heaven that he may be confirmed in his faith if weak and unstable, supplied with those dispositions to godliness which he wants, and those enlarged which he hath, that God would assist him in opposing the sins which by reason of the temper of his constitution or course of life oftenest assault and most easily overpower him, and that the divine aid may come suitably and in season to his rescue from the encounters and onsets which may be given by Satan or the flesh, that thereby he may be enabled to walk humbly and thankfully before God, uprightly with man, and holily with himself, and also that those inclinations to virtue and goodness, which divine grace had begun, may be maintained and cherished in him, so that he may go on in an entire conformity to God's holy will even unto his end. Secondly, after your prayers for the good of his soul, you must make your application to him yourself by your counsel, and encourage him by your example. 1. By counsel, which ought to be various and answerable to the condition of his mind. For you are to advise him about his soul in such a manner as may be most productive of its happiness. The way to be truly happy is to do well. To do well is by our actions to answer those very ends for which we were made. But the ends for which we were made are both to glorify God in the highest manner, by worshipping him as he himself requires, in pure devotion, with a sincere mind, and by doing all the good we can unto all men, which two things, as they comprehend the whole duty that God expects of us, so are they the true interest of the soul to observe. But since a blind and misguided zeal can never do anything that will be acceptable to God, in that God has so great a regard to the intendments of every action, which, if amiss, the whole action will be so, it is convenient you direct your counsel to him, by way of information, in such manner as that he may arrive at a clear and entire knowledge of his duty. For how can he be obedient to the divine will, who knows not what it is that it doth require? So that if they with whom you converse be possessed with a thick and palpable ignorance in matters of religion, before all things let it be your business to instruct thoroughly and enlighten clearly their minds, to such measure and degree that they may entertain true notions of God's holy essence and his blessed attributes, and of all that he has willed of us, either in his positive laws or in the natural laws engraven on our very beings. And having thus instructed your neighbour in respect of his soul, 2. Let your work be persuasion, that he would heartily betake himself to the practice of what he by you understands concerning God and himself. Forasmuch as knowledge is vain, which can in no wise be useful to the services of life, and labour misspent, which is productive of no fruit. Besides, our ties to obedience are made stronger and more obliging by the increase of our knowledge, and so the shame will be greater and the crime more foul to violate them. Hence is it that the servant who knows and yet neglects his master's will shall be punished with more stripes. He that in persuading would manage his affair without miscarriage should be furnished and provided with such arguments as will evidence to the person with whom he treats the necessity of embracing his advice, and the pleasant consequences that will accrue therefrom, and the punishments to be inflicted in case of disobedience. So that since God has promised a most happy condition to those who live well, and denounced utter ruin to the deserters of his laws, it will prove the true interest of every one of us not only to be religious, but to promote it in others, if it be granted that God is able to make good what he has promised, and willing to perform what he is able, to do which you are to take notice, these 3 things only are required. 1. To know the nature of a creature. 2. To be vested with a power of doing good or harm to it. Lastly, the having a will to exert this power in the destruction or advance of a creature according to its behaviour, all which qualifications are eminently found in God. 1. His knowledge. It is not to be understood that we can be rendered miserable or happy by him who is ignorant wherein our happiness or misery consists. The physician knows not how to administer his potion with security of his patient's life, or without manifest hazard of his own reputation, if he have not before investigated the true reasons of the distemper, in such sort as to be able to apply what is proper and apposite for removing the causes thereof. But God, being a great searcher of the heart and trier of the reins, knows the mould wherein we were made, and the very constitutive ingredients of our essence, in having been the author of the same, insomuch that nothing which belongs unto us can be hid from his eyes. Whence it appears, he knows what is good for us better than we do ourselves, or anybody besides. 2. God's power. Forasmuch as we can humble and crush, when we please, those that be weaker than ourselves, their daring threats or allurements are so contemptible that, if not to be wondered at, they are to be smiled at. Nor do the circumstances greatly vary between our equals and us, in that we can repulse the onsets they give us with the same force, and so they must expect their own ruin in attempting ours. But if we consider God, that he so infinitely surpasseth us in power as to be able to dash us all into nothing, and by the word wherewith he made them to turn the same creatures into non-existence, it will work the most courageous into a dreadful awe of his power, and excited us all reverence of his great name. For since, in the idea we have of God naturally, are included all perfections, and since power is a perfection, it is necessary that we suppose him omnipotent, or that all power is in him or derived from him, insomuch that, as he can bestow on us all that is requisite to our felicity and well-being, without being engaged to any other for aid or assistance, so also can he spoil us of all the good we be possessed of, or hinder us from all that we can desire, to the rendering us completely miserable and desolate, notwithstanding all the resistance which may be made against him. For all the power of all the nations on earth combined and knit together are of no moment compared with his, whereof they be but a small part, so that if God once arise, his enemies must be scattered before him. Wherefore it behoveth us all, with a watchful eye and care, as we would avoid utter confusion, to observe his pleasure and to obey his commands. 3. God's will. Now, having made out to you that God has a clear knowledge of what is good for his creature, and an absolute, abundantly sufficient power of dealing with it according to this knowledge, that is, of blessing or eternally torturing it, as it shall behave itself, it is farther necessary, in the last place, to the convincing of any rational being that it behoveth him in every action to have a special regard to the divine promises and threats, to demonstrate how God's will bears a proportion to his knowledge and power, that is, as God understands wherein the felicity of his creatures consists, and is able to prosper or blast them, so likewise he is willing on their performing the conditions which he has proposed, or on their disobedience, to let forth his power in their happiness or ruin, which may be gathered from his promises that will be infallibly performed. For veracity being one of the attributes of God, and all his attributes being inseparable from his essence, it must follow that whatsoever he has promised, we ought to believe he will make it good, because it is inconsistent that he should be God and not be true, or that falsity, which is imperfection, should be found in God, whom we suppose completely perfect. Now that de facto he has said, he will reward or punish us, according as we be sorrowful for our sins, or continue in impenitency, as it is evident from many particular places of Holy Writ, so it may be proved from the whole design of the Scripture, which is nothing else but to offer salvation to believers, and decree damnation to those who obstinately go on in the evil of their ways. Quote, he that believeth shall be saved, he that believeth not shall be damned. End quote. Thus I have more largely insisted on this head of counsel, and where no counsel is, the people fall, in order to the good of the soul, and have showed the welfare thereof to depend on God wholly, as well because the great design of every action should be for the preservation of our better part, for what will it profit a man to gain the whole world and to lose his own soul, as that I might accommodate you with a copious number of arguments taken from the divine attributes, to awaken, if not to frighten men into a serious consideration of their latter end, and a speedy use of those means which are agreeable thereunto. Certainly motives derived from the divine omniscience, power, and goodness should be sufficient to prevail with him who has not sinned himself below the capacity of a brute, to an entire reformation of his life. Wherefore, if it be true that God better knows how to promote our happiness than we ourselves, as he certainly doth, if he is best able to act what he knows, and most willing to do what he is able, there cannot be the least room for objection, why we should not put ourselves entirely under his protection, and consequently devote both soul and body to his service. And this is that armour I would have you fence yourselves with, the reason and arguments to be provided of, for the promoting of real goodness, and the putting out of countenance the wickedness and debauchery of a corrupted world, which is nothing else but to do good to the souls of others. I have already showed what we would, and what we would not have done to ourselves in general, and that we must do as we would be done by to others in relation to their souls, bodies, reputations, and estates, that we must do good to the soul by intercession to God for it. 2. You are to promote the good of your neighbour's soul by your example. Whatever is exposed to the view of our own eyes acts as an example, more powerfully engages our attention, and sinking lower in the mind leaves more lasting impressions behind it. Forasmuch as the image of a thing formed by immediate vision is more adequate, and in distincter order contains more parts of that which it represents, than any idea can be framed in the brain of what is barely known, by the relation of another. Mere precepts, without a carriage suitable thereunto, exhibit but a lifeless religion, and men thereby are not more scared from sin than they are afraid of a dead carcass, whereas a life led according to our doctrine is powerful in persuading and convicting the most obstinate sinner, who, although he may sleep under your wholesome instructions, yet by your holy example will awaken at last to a sense of his folly. The cowardly soldier that was never warmed into any valorous resolutions, by hearing long and handsome orations in praise of fortitude, would be ashamed not to follow the courageous conduct of his general in the hottest pieces of service. Neither can I see any reason why men should believe you are real with them in your advice, when you confute it by a contrary practice. How can I deem him serious with me, in telling it is my duty to be chaste and temperate, that lives himself in open adultery and common drunkenness? Will other men be brought into the opinion that the arguments you urge for justice and mercy are the secret sense of your soul and the pure issues of your mind, while you yourself act the part of a thief and extortioner, and of one who grinds, as the prophet speaks, the face of the poor? What availeth it to exhort others to be faithful in performing their promises, if you never keep your own? Will men hearken to you in teaching them that it is the command of Christ to do as they would be done unto, if notwithstanding, in all your actions, you manage the interests of self? Now, it is to be acknowledged that they can do but little good with their perhaps otherwise pertinent and suitable advice, who are the cause of so much licentiousness by their evil conversation. Add to all which, that the mischievous effect of a bad example is to breed in others a disesteem of religion. For how can they entertain any brave and generous thoughts of that religion which licenses its followers in such profligate courses, and permits that which is forbidden by the natural understanding? For the heathens, by the bare guidance of reason only, did constantly avoid it. I must either think that religion mean and sordid, which allows men the practice of such villainies, or else think the followers thereof guilty of the basest hypocrisy and dissimulation, that lead lives so wide from what they profess. So that it is just matter of grief to all good men that it should be as true as it is little regarded that none talk more of religion, nor live by it less, than this present age, insomuch that a pagan who has been a spectator of such dealings cannot think other than that we make religion a mask for our most loathsome miscarriages, since, were we fully persuaded of a future state after this life, and of a God who will severely inquire into every human action, as having irrevocably decreed to make us sharers of eternal felicity if we make good the conditions on our parts required, or of torturing us, supposing our disobedience, with insupportable anguish, this could not but make us very anxious in our deportment and present management of ourselves, forasmuch as all the glories of the world, especially considering the shortness of the time wherein they may be enjoyed, bear so inconsiderable a shadow of proportion to eternity. Wherefore it will remain that he must say either that our religion is repugnant to reason and the principles of government, as certainly self-interest is, or else that we disbelieve it. Therefore be pleased to perpend that if religion ought to be the grand concern of the world, namely, that we all carefully do what God has enjoined in such manner as shall be acceptable to him, and if in those things alone our happiness consists, then to bring a scandal on this religion, as every evil liver necessarily doth, must be so great a piece of ingratitude to God, and so pernicious and deadly to mankind, that in reason it may almost be deemed unpardonable. Let thus much suffice for our behaviour toward our neighbour in respect of the soul. 3. We must do as we would be done by, as to the body. The body is of so near alliance and so closely united to the soul, that by violence done to one they both suffer, and like partners share in the same misfortunes, which is the reason that if the body be indisposed by a wound or disease, the soul is disabled from doing its office, because any hurt to the body causeth so strong and vehement a sensation in the soul, which we call grief, that in a manner it depriveth it of all power of surveying with any clearness that copious imagery which it has of objects. Wherefore men in pain become unfit for business, by not being able to keep their minds closely attentive to anything that is long or intricate, and by consequence are debarred the comfortable use of riches or greatness, that is, whatever this world counts either profitable or pleasant. Forasmuch as through ill-natured passion a man may do that injury to his neighbour's body in a moment, which is irreparable, and never to be compensated by all the friendly offices he can do in his whole life after, this consideration ought highly to influence the behaviour of churlish masters to their servants, who show less kindness to their man than their beast, and treat him with more blows and less civility than their spaniel, as if they had acquired an absolute power over his body to maim or dismember it at the instance of their brutish inclinations, which actions, as they are contrary to Christianity, which commands love and humility, so they would be derided by an infidel or Turk, and you would deem the practices of them either devoid of all reason, or, which is worse, that they always abuse it. If we do as we would be done by, how comes it to pass that we commit those outrages on other men without regret, that we can ourselves with no patience suffer? Is this any other than a confutation of all the methods of our Saviour, whose whole behaviour was full of compassion to his creatures? Or doth Christianism inspire men rather with the cruelty of the tiger than the meekness of the lamb? If this be false, as it certainly is, it would not be easy to assign what is more opposite to the principles of our religion than our own practices. For nothing enjoins charity, good nature, and kindness more than our religion, and nobody observes them less than ourselves. Charity commands us to love our enemies, but we even hate our friends. Whereas it enjoins us a benign and gentle carriage to those below us, we saucily affront our governors, and show how ill we brook God's dominion by the indignities we cast on those he has deputed over us, insomuch that had the primitive Christians delivered those tenets which we practice, so repugnant are they to government and the order of civil society, I believe our Saviour's name would not have been heard of beyond Jewry, and the Christian religion never been propagated farther than the country in which it was born. For it appears from reason and experience how powerful an influence religion has on the peace and quiet of kingdoms, that nothing so effectually secures the public peace, or so easily works disturbance and ruin, as its good or evil administration. Wherefore, if there be any principles of nobleness and generosity in us, springing from a being distinct from our own body, or if there be any remains of man in us beside the shape, methinks we should not carry so unequal a deportment between ourselves and others, and one so contradictory to reason. Let us but consider how much time is spent and trouble undergone barely for nourishing the body, with what care we guard it from outward force, and secure it from inward diseases, which, as they are sufficient tokens of our great love to it, so are they of our inhuman and unchristian behaviour to our neighbour, whom we are offended with on no occasion, and barbarously murder without remorse. Daily experience has made it too evident, I should remind you, how plentiful the mischiefs are that spring from an unkindly usage of our neighbour's body, especially if the person be in the capacity of a father or master of a family, where the young infant feels the wound, and the assault reacheth to the whole house. Wherefore, to conclude this head of discourse, let us sincerely consider, when any occasion is offered of quarrel with our equals, or of giving correction to our inferiors, how highly we value our own flesh and blood, and in a proportionable tenderness do so unto them as we would be dealt by ourselves. 3. We must deal with our neighbour as we desire he should deal with us, in respect of his good name. How faulty men on this account have been is manifest from the observation that there is nothing we be more solicitously jealous of than our own, and nothing we be more lavish of than our neighbour's reputation. How on small hints, trifling occasions, imperfect reports, and groundless stories do we wound the credit of our neighbour, which is as dear to him as life itself. How we blight the esteem he has abroad, weaken the value he has at home, and cast a mist over all that is bright, or giveth lustre to his name and reputation. And yet, notwithstanding this uncivil usage of our neighbour's name, we are so nice of our own repute, as hardly to be induced to make any overtures or terms of reconciliation and peace to him who shall diminish the least part thereof. The truth is, men, in the eager pursuit of riches and power and other worldly advantages, designedly aim at the purchase of a great name. For to what purpose should they heap up wealth, and whatever carrieth esteem with it, if they did not secretly please themselves with those reflections which they conceive others make on their pomp and grandeur? Not but that I believe a brave soul thinks too meanly of the greater part of men, who usually are corrupted by interest, or blinded by prejudice, to measure the extent of its felicity by vulgar breath, or to account its excellency from common talk. But every one would have his actions thought, if not worthy of praise, yet such as may be excused, and so not to be the subject of uncivil censure. Hence it is, the most debauched and lewd person is loath to be upbraided with his uncleanness, and the murderer with his cruelty. Nor will a covetous man own his extortion, or a conceited person his vainglory, but will find out some specious pretences that may soften, if they cannot wholly excuse his miscarriage. Wherefore, when you reprove your brother, let it be without sharpness, and when you tell him of his crime, let it be without bitterness. When you command him, let it be with generous intentions, and for good reasons, and on due measure. For too much praise is fawning, too little is ill nature. But if you do it justly, you teach him its true value. 4. This rule of doing as we would be done by extends to men's estates. In all dealings thereunto relating, we be obliged to be both just and merciful, which are great instances of our love. 1. Justice. It may be defined a rendering to all men everything they have a real title to, so that to detain or keep back that from another what he has a right to is injustice. Now, seeing a right to a thing may be many ways acquired, as by gift, promise, bargain, or contract, by inheritance or service done, it will follow that in so many ways we may injure men, and because we, by the unforced instigation of nature, do all desire to escape any injury or wrong, therefore we must use especial care that by injustice we wrong not others, of what they have a real title to, or propriety in, by any of these particular titles. We may look on justice in a double respect, the one distributive, the other commutative. 1. Distributive justice is placed in giving rewards or punishments, in conferring honours, or in setting men out to disgrace, according as they have merited, the example whereof belongs to the magistrates and those who take cognizance of offenders. The ends of it are to promote goodness, and enlarge the dominion of virtue, by raising its followers to true honour, and securing unto them infinite satisfaction and peace of mind, which causes them not to be dejected at the untoward usages of a cross fortune, and to bear up cheerfully against the most unkindly assaults of malice or cruelty, and to suppress villainies and debauchery, by exposing the persons wherein they are found to open shame, and frightening other men from a like practice by their ignominious sufferings. These are the only principles, the use of which will fix and settle princes on their thrones, so that their power and crowns cannot be moved, and assure to them a long and constant, a ready and willing obedience from the subject. For such is their sovereign and diffusive nature and virtue, that their healing and kindly influence will reach the greatest monarchs, as it is beneficial to their meanest vassals and slaves. 2. Justice is commutative, which consists in a conscientious performance of all promises, bargains, or contracts. 1. Promises. In making a promise, we pass our right over to another, so that he who promiseth becomes a debtor, and the thing promised becomes a debt. If therefore we desire that all men should pay unto us the debts they owe, then are we obliged to make good our promises unto them. And indeed we should be more exact in the payment of a promise than the discharge of a debt. For in it our honour and reputation, which are most dear to us, are given for security. Besides, as in nothing we can more to the life resemble God, one of whose attributes is to be true, than in our faithfulness, so to stand to our covenants is the only tie wherewith societies and converse are held together, or can be supported. Add to all this the lovely consequences which result from keeping our word, the love and favour it conciliates to us from God, and with that the honour it procures us among men, the esteem and credit it raiseth to us whenever we be known, and how far, from a punctual exactness, we may be trusted in commerce above others, insomuch that warily to promise only what we are able, and carefully to perform what we have promised, is a virtue so amiable and full of beauty, that it must need transport him who truly considers it with admiration, and inflame his appetite after the purchase thereof. It at once endears us to heaven, and makes us favourites of the world, not only bringing wealth and honour with it, but heaping up durable treasures for us in the regions above, which are without the wasting reach of time and envy. To this place it belongs, that we take notice how strict an obligation lieth on all masters to give unto their servants those wages for which they have contracted, and not to keep back from the labourer his due, nor to withhold from the hireling what he has justly merited by the sweat of his brow. For if it be forbidden that you should muzzle the mouth of the ox, which treadeth out the corn, then a greater engagement on you ought to be acknowledged, not to defraud your poor brother, in all things else your equal, of the wages due to him by promise, which he may dearly have earned, as well by the consumption of his time as the expense of his strength and spirits. He, having thus purchased it, it ceases to be yours, and therefore to detain it would be injustice. Hitherto is reducible the necessity of paying your debts, and although a man may as lawfully challenge what you have promised as the repayment of that he lent you, yet not to restore what you borrow seems more heinous, in that you make him of whom you borrow so much worse than he was before, by how much the thing he lent cometh to. 2. Justice commutative restrains us from depriving our neighbour of the goods which he actually possesses, not only his money, but whatever is valuable by money, as houses, lands, the fruits of the earth, or cattle, from which it follows that robberies or thefts are severely prohibited, that is, either assaults, where by violence and force you spoil a man of his property, or secretly and under covert of the night, which time best becomes the darkness of the deed, you purloin from him his substance. Now, besides that the thief is not likely long to persist undisclosed, from the industrious search of the sagacious inquirer whom he has wronged, the lively sense of whose loss makes him spare neither cost nor any labour to discover the malefactor, did he but reflect with what fear he begins, with what terror he carries on, and probably with what shame he shall end his sinful enterprise, with what a ghastly retinue of servants he is environed, suspicions and jealousies, hunger and cold, the gloomy night, the horrors of a blacker conscience, a trembling hand, a beating heart, and a dizzy head, all which are the inseparable companions of his villainy, with what solicitousness he labours if he miss his game, and with what fright if he obtain it, all this surely should be sufficient to scare anyone who is in his sober wits from the practice of this sin, especially if the amazing and dismal consideration of judgment to come enter into his thoughts. 3. I shall consider justice as it relateth to trade, buying and selling, and all manner of traffic, wherein these two general rules are to be observed, that you take no advantage of other men's ignorance or necessity. 1. That you take no advantage of their ignorance, which may be these several ways. 1. In using false weights and corrupted measures. The buyer expects that quantity which is allowed by the laws of the country and the custom of the place, so that he who useth a false measure or a deceitful balance keeps back from the buyer part of what he bought, which is plain deceit and owned by all men so to be. 2. If the seller hide and conceal any fault or imperfection in his commodity, neither will it excuse him to say, the question was never put whether the thing was faultless, for if by the money bid it may be collected that the buyer supposed the thing complete, in having offered the full value, were it so, it will follow that he is cheated of as much as the thing sold is worse by such fault or imperfection. And so this is as manifest a fraud as that of a deceitful balance, and which, though the laws do not, God certainly will punish. 3. Notwithstanding the weight be good, the measure full, and the thing sold void of faults, yet if, taking advantage of his ignorance, you make your chapman pay above the value and worth of the thing, this also will prove no other than deceit, because, were it your own case, you would think it hard measure to be abused in the price for your ignorance of the thing, or overreached for trusting to another man's honesty. 2. The second head I remarked of injustice in trade is the necessity of other men. This happens either when we, having monopolized or grasped all things of one sort and kind into our own clutches, make them bear what unreasonable rate soever we please, or when we prey on another man's need, and force him to pay not only for the commodity, but for his own necessity too, in exacting a sum which we know he never would give but by reason of his present exigency. This is extortion, for you should not enhance the value of that you sell, unless the price either was raised to you or has improved since the buying. To this head may be referred the unreasonable disproportions which some men extort for the use of their money, because the borrower has an absolute necessity for so much, and may not have credit, perhaps, to take it up in another place. For with what conscience can he demand double as much as he knows it is possible for another to gain by what he lends him? And thus much I have discoursed of justice, which, whether it be suitable to any man's practice, I meddle not, but sure I am, it is agreeable to your judgments, and on account of that usage which you will heartily desire at the hands of others. I am now to speak of charity, which is the distinguishing character and inseparable mark of a Christian, by which our Lord the Holy Jesus has taught us to know and rightly understand him. Quote, "By this shall all men know ye are my disciples, if ye love one another." End quote. It is a benign and sweet temper of soul, which disposeth us, not only sincerely to wish, but willingly to do all the good we can to other men, in their several capacities. I cannot give a better or more exact view of charity than by representing to you the blessed Jesus for a pattern, who made it his business to heal the sick, to give sight to the blind, to give life to those who are dead, to dispossess devils, to inspire men with holiness and excite them to lead a righteous life, to animate his followers with a zeal for works of friendship and mercy, to shame men out of their cruelty and self-interest by his own example, letting them see how he came to ransom their souls, and to vindicate them from the intolerable consequences of lying under the divine displeasure, to a state of bliss and immortality, insomuch that his whole life appeared a continual act of goodness. Now it is not to be expected that I should give you such entire rules and laws as might guide you about charity, and as I have done of justice, because it is not confined to any limits that are fixed, but depends as well on your own power and abilities, as on the circumstances which the person is in, whom you design to relieve. Wherefore we may conclude that charity requires we neglect no opportunity of doing good, so that, who is a fit object of our mercy, and when it is we have an opportunity, are things left to God and our consciences to judge. It is justice not to rob the poor, but charity requires us to relieve them. It is against justice to deal deceitfully with our friend, but it is inconsistent with charity not to love our enemy. So that where one leaves us, you see, the other takes its beginning, charity being an appendage, and as it were an additional act, made and annexed by the royal court of heaven to the laws of nature, which were before promulgated in our souls concerning equity. Particular duties of charity are these. 1. That you give your best counsel and directions to your brother, and this in the most prevailing language, and when he is most fit to receive it. If you reprove him, let your expressions be without rancour and sharpness, so that he may be convinced that the end of your advice is his interest, and the cause of reprehending him your love. 2. That you forgive injuries, nor let your passions boil up to the height, so that you must think it necessary to repay the indignity which was cast on you by a greater, but keep yourself in an equal and unconcerned humour, notwithstanding the most impetuous assaults that are made on your temper, which will breed that meekness wherewith you will become able to obey the precept of your Saviour, quote, that being smitten on the one cheek, you turn the other, end quote. That is to say, you will be so far from seeking revenge of an affront as to be ready to receive another, and to make up the difference by repaying all with good turns. 3. Charity forbids that you should envy any happy advance your neighbour has of his fortune, but commands that you rejoice at his prosperity, and as much as in you lies, promote his greatness, which doubtless would be done were your love of him and yourself equal. 4. Charity enjoins you to lend your aid and succour to the rescuing your neighbour out of any calamity that has befallen him, whether it be from poverty or from the violence of others. One commands your beneficence and liberality, the other seeks the use of your hand and strength, and both require you to compassionate his condition as your own. At length I shall enter on the persuasive part of this discourse, and use some motives from the nature of the thing to induce you to the practice of what I have said. 1. The first shall be taken from the end for which we were made. Man did not, like a mushroom, spring by chance out of the ground, nor had he his being of himself, but was the curious workmanship, except that his sin is derived from man as the proper fountain, of another, who clothed him with skin and flesh, supported him with bones, tied him together with muscles and nerves, and into this lovely structure inspired an immortal soul, which was to govern and command, to regulate and guide it in all its operations, so that man stands under the greatest and most endearing circumstances of obligation to the author of his being, and therefore, laying aside all considerations of himself, he ought to betake himself to an entire obedience of his will, which is not that he should barely gratify himself, or follow the motions of his wily passions, or do whatever should be dictated by his appetites, but being entrusted with talents, and having laws before him, he should make them the standard whereby to measure all his behaviour, and the rule wherewith all his actions should comply. Wherefore, if you believe the existence of a God, and that you have a soul, to be continued in being to eternity, if you think that this God created you, and thereby acquired a right to be your lawful commander, and that he is of too great wisdom to be mocked, and has too much power either to be defeated or brought to terms, that he is a rewarder of them that seek him, as well as a severe animadverter on offenders, lastly, if you will not confess yourselves guilty of the vilest hypocrisy, or of the greatest folly, of the vilest hypocrisy in disbelieving the religion you profess, or of the greatest folly in exposing your souls to the hazard of eternal and irreparable ruin, then reflect seriously with yourselves how necessary it is to your salvation that you be up and doing the will of your Master, and how unreasonable it is that you, being dependent creatures, should think yourselves licensed to the practice of what you please. We all own such an obedience to our lawful king, as rescinds the power of doing what we list, and yet we presume an absolute liberty from our duty in God's service, and in matters of religion. That is to say, we acknowledge the authority of God's minister over us, while we deny his own. But what, I pray, is more grossly absurd than to subject ourselves to the less, and yet resist the greater power, even that from whence the less was derived? 2. The second motive is from the intrinsic beauty and loveliness of the rule itself. I cannot conceive what should put more fervour and zeal into our devotion than the reasonableness of our religion, and the inherent lustre shining in all its laws, its precepts being worthy of the wisdom of God, and suitable to the nature of man, rectifying our reason, purifying our natures, and perfecting our understandings, its chief design being to tie us to the ravishing and unspeakable pleasures of justice, innocence, and mercy, and to remove whatever was destructive of the order and tranquillity of society by introducing love and kindness, and the noble principle of, quote, doing as, end quote, etc., into the world. Our religion requires of us meekness and equity, charity and long-sufferance, contentedness and compassion, friendship, humility and patience, and everything that has a real tendency to the felicity of mankind. 3. Quote, let us do to others as we would have them do to us, end quote, because both they and we bear the same stamp and impress of heaven. For the rich and poor, the king and slave, alike resemble God, and are equal sharers of his image, having been all cast in the same mould, and made of the same materials, enjoying like bodies and equal souls, and in these the same faculties and dispositions, so that the odds between man and man are not of nature, nor founded in any essential difference in being, but the mere result of civil constitution, and that was from sin, which first put men to distinguish into proprieties, and sever into portions what nature left undivided and in common. Besides, God hath given the same laws, and a like measure of ability to perform obedience to all, so that none can pretend themselves dearlings of heaven more than others, or to have a greater share in the divine love, before that men themselves by transgressing introduce the discrimination. Wherefore, since we be all alike, it is but reasonable that we sympathize with one another in our several conditions, being fellow feelers of what our brother suffers, as well as rejoicing at his prosperity. Let me also move you to be merciful to your neighbour for God's sake, whose image he bears. For as he who affronts the king's picture will be adjudged to have designed treason against his person, so kindness done by you to men shall God interpret as done to himself. 4. Because if we be just and generous in time of our prosperity, it will cause a like affection in others to us. Now, seeing that the best of men are but men, and what is one man's condition may become another's, and because riches, honours, and whatever gives you preeminence over your mean brother, are obnoxious to change, and bottomed on unstable foundations, it will be as politic as religious to be beneficent and kind in distributing your wealth. For this very reason, that should you meet adverse fortune, the same mercy to you might be hoped for from others. Whereas, in the fall of a proud person, it is his greatest misery not to be pitied. So also, if the cruel man comes to have his own days shortened, men believe it is the issue of justice, that he should taste of the bitterness of the sword, who therewith had made the mother childless, and surfeited himself in quaffing innocent blood. Thus likewise the gripping chuff may by common calamity or force, for else will he carry them along with him to the ground, change his bags and treasure for poverty, without raising any melancholy concern in the beholders, inasmuch as there is no cause why they should lament for his loss of that gold with which, when in his possession, he never did good. But contrariwise, the man of bounty and generous principles, who used to deal out his bread to the needy, and disperse his riches among the indigent, who conveyed of his liberality into the remotest corners, that he might succour the comfortless, can hardly sink in his estate without the regret and sorrow of most who see or have heard of him. Neither will they suffer him to starve, who was so ready to clothe the naked, and to give food to him who was hungry. It is cause of general grief to behold him in prison that was always so busy in ransoming the captive, and that he should become a scorn and derision to others, who himself used to cover both the shame and infirmities of his brother. Therefore let us carefully remember, whoever are distressed, to conceive ourselves in the same state and condition with them, and hereby, having assumed their persons on us, whatsoever we would have done by our neighbours and friends in the like circumstances, the very same let us do unto them in their misery, which is true compassion. For, as I have said, seeing we are men, we must therefore consider that no human calamity is exempted from us, and thereby learn to commiserate other men in adversity, as if the like misery were already, or maybe, on our own persons. 5. Did we use other men as we expect or desire to be used at their hands, it would be the best and greatest security of our lives, honour, reputation, riches, and power. For did we all as heartily wish for the preservation of these things in them, as we do in ourselves, then should we with equal pity weep over the misery of others, and with like concern defend and advance their happiness as our own, the effect of which would be a Catholic love, meekness, humility, patience, amity, and universal peace spreading itself over the face of the whole earth. So advantageous is our religion to our interest, and so agreeable to our reason. Lastly, let us be moved to this duty by the consideration of that reward which for our obedience we shall receive of God hereafter. Did we but spend more thoughts on our future state, considering that as now we behave ourselves, we must inevitably live in heaven or in hell forever, which as I believe there is none here but doth readily acknowledge, so I wish they more unfeignedly would consider it, and it would be enough to keep us from weighing our own and our neighbours' concernments in such differing balances, and that notwithstanding our now healthy bodies, active minds, and braving estates, we shall ere long be summoned to a strict account, it would be sufficient to make us serious in our religion, and careful in the most important affairs of our soul. So also the consideration of the reward to be had of God hereafter would be enough to make us bear up against the greatest reproaches and indignities wherewith men invade our reputation for being religious, and make us think it no hard exchange to part with our lives for the sake of the blessed Jesus, because the life you are to receive for it will infinitely surpass that you lay down, and it is but prudence to part with a corruptible for an incorruptible, a finite for an everlasting, a miserable for a happy state. Instead of being clothed with rags, you shall put on the long white robe of Christ's righteousness. Not only your tears shall be done away, But your mourning shall be changed into joy, your weeping into laughter. Instead of penitential psalms, you shall sing songs of deliverance. All the ravishing delights your souls are capable of, all the satisfaction which rational beings can have, you shall receive of God forevermore.